Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a request on a reconsider on an item that was brought up that relates to needing, because it needed more discussion, I understand. Commissioner Previtt?
Yeah, with that last motion we dealt with the independent petitions, obviously I didn't have any of the numbers, so I was struggling through it in terms of where it's appropriate, which I don't really have a sense. However, as I'm going through the information and thinking about it, what we did doesn't seem to make sense, and consistent with my urging the Commission act in consistent manner with respect to policy considerations or components of the program. If I'm understanding this correctly as I think through it, if you increase the party threshold to a level, and you do so because of fiscal concerns and the jeopardy it causes to the program, if the independent petition numbers aren't increased similarly, then what would occur would be accessing the ballot and the program almost in a manner that may be easier than doing so through votes on the ballot. So I just want to make sure that we're working through that properly, because I don't feel like there was, I certainly didn't feel like I was given proper discussion or justification for when the motion was brought. And I just want to make sure that we end up in a position where the program makes sense from other aspects.
So are you moving to reconsider the original motion on 45?
Yeah, reconsider the motion and with discussion, with an explanation from of the original motion sponsor, whoever that was as to how this plays into the fiscal side of things, because that's what I'm worried about, the cost of this.
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's very helpful for me, just thinking about it, as I've said, throughout the totality of the program. So it's helpful to get a sense of how this specific piece fits into what our charge is and how we make sure that we're not exceeding the budget allocated to us for this program.
It really comes down to, in my view, this. We have already made the recommendation to raise the party thresholds, and that was very controversial. And we went through a storm to do it, only to then have a circumstance where you could have a party that chooses not to go through regular party status, but simply go through this lower threshold to begin the process of gaining qualification for the campaign finance matching dollars would seem ludicrous. You just need something reasonable. And frankly, we're going to a number that is less than 3 times, well, it's 3 times the existing number, and yet at the same time, again, you've got the entire state of New York as registered voters. And I take what Commissioner Galvin said is very true, and that it is difficult to petition, and I understand that. But I've petitioned regularly. When you have to make sure you're getting, in my case, enrolled Democrats, and they're at the right address, and they're in the right district, everything. You're limited by district. You get a Democrat who's across the street in the wrong district. They didn't know it unless you're going door to door, and a lot of it's done at grocery stores and other places, public places, it is very difficult. But when you are looking statewide, and you can pick up any voter and stand in Penn Station and sign up voters, you're going to get some people who actually aren't registered. That's true, and that's why you go for larger than the number. There's no question. But overwhelmingly, you should have qualified registered voters, and they don't have to be from any particular party. And that's what makes it such a loose, easy system. And here, again, you have all of these parties that have done it. I mean, we have the evidence of the last, just the last 7 gubernatorial elections since 1994, when you've had, between 5 and 10 individual candidates running on these lines. And by the way, it's not just the gubernatorial line you're talking about. You can have a whole slate. You can run a slate for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and comptroller. Each of those in the general election, as the way we've done it, except for the lieutenant governor would be 3,500. You're looking at over $10 million for one of these parties. You have 5 such candidates that end up qualifying. And remember something, the qualification, I know it's tougher with the thresholds and the rest. In this day and age of internet solicitation and small dollar donors through the internet, the world has changed. This isn't about picking up the phone anymore or running little house parties. That's not how money is being raised in the United States. And as it is now, it is much more sophisticated, advanced, and effective than it was 4 years ago. And I assure you, 4 years from now, if we want this program to be viable under the strictures that are in front of us, the $100 million, et cetera, we have to put these kind of constraints in. And what are we saying? We're saying that, look, if you want to be governor of the state of New York, for crying out loud, or a comptroller, or attorney general, you got to go out and get, and you're not from a permanent party, you got to go out and get the signatures, and you have to have that support. Because if you can't get that support, how can you possibly expect to garner the votes that would make you even in contention to win, never mind to win, and yet you'd be able to access all of these dollars? That's the argument.
I believe there's also a distinction between voting on a line versus signing a petition. Signing a petition is just, you're not even necessarily putting your support behind anything in particular. It's not bounding you to anything, versus a vote on a line is almost a greater level of expression in terms of where you are electorally. So, okay.
Okay. The discussion.
So I'm very troubled about the idea of reconsidering votes so quickly, although in the break, it became my view from discussions I've had that this whole package for campaign finance may fall apart if we did not go with the original recommendation. So it's really troubling to me, and I'm going to have to vote in favor of this motion, but with the belief that this will all be set aside because we don't have the authority to do it anyway.
All right, can I ask for a voice vote? I'm going to do a roll call. Commissioner Berger?
Yes.
Commissioner Denistine?
Yes.
Commissioner Galvin?
No.
Commissioner Gadachu?
Yes, just explaining my vote, it was helpful both to hear the conversation here and have more context about, the potential fiscal impact on the program. I mean, up to $40 million if 5 candidates ran would take up a huge portion of the allocation. Thank you, I appreciate you. I appreciate your comments. I'm speaking. So it was helpful for me to get a context for the entire fiscal impact of this on the program as a whole, if we want to have resources to be allocated against the program as a whole for all the candidates or across the state. It's helpful to understand how much of that would be subsumed by not changing the limits in this respect.
It's 45. Motion is for 45, yes. Thank you, Commissioner Gadachu, I appreciate it. Yes, for Jacobs on the 45, yeah. Mr. Nona?
Yes.
Mr. Previtt?
Yes, for the sake of consistency.
Yes. Commissioner Rodriguez? Yes.
Oh, she muted
Sorry,
herself.
She was
sorry.
muted, but I saw the
All right,
yes.
say it. I know we saw you nod, but we didn't hear you.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Commissioner Vargas?
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes. Thank you. Commissioner Berger, if I could ask you to please go through the elements of the bill before a final vote.
We're going to do this essentially in summary unless there are changes or new pieces. So the recommendation. The first page are the equivalent of legislative findings. They're essentially taken out of what's already in our enabling legislation and the discussion. So unless anybody has a problem there, it's all the stuff that sounds real good. Okay. In part 1, on page 2, going all the way to page 2, that comes after page 1.
Thank you.
Part 1, the limits are in A for governor, controller, governor, lieutenant governor, controller, whatever.
18,000.
Right,
Isn't
but it's
it-
governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general,
Yeah.
and controller.
Need to add Attorney General. in
Governor,
there.
that's a typo,
Okay.
it's governor's in twice.
$9,000.
Right, because it's per cycle, it says. in
Per
here.
cycle?
It's 9 and 9.
Yeah,
1 second. That's right, yes.
Yes.
9 and 9s.
Yep.
And we changed the assembly to 3,
Yes.
3,000. Part B, the governor only gets one shot, but we do give the attorney general a shot there too. And it's again 9,000, 5,000, and 3,000.
Wait, so B has governor twice, so that's a mistake.
right, it's a typo,
Right.
both,
And
both
should be attorney
sections.
general, right.
And we should take out lieutenant governor, or we should put in governor
And lieutenant.
and lieutenant governor, comma, governor, I'm sorry, attorney general and controller. Correct?
Right.
Okay. On definitions,
Just, it might be helpful, because since the public is not following along, there are good provisions in here that I think people would be happy about, that we should call out, including, Commissioner Berger, that these amounts shall not be increased or decreased by the cost of living adjustment otherwise provided for in the election law.
right.
So
If
just,
if somebody wants to raise these, the legislature has to go out and actually take steps to raise them. On the definitions, authorized committee, PCFB, contributor, covered election, election cycle expenditures, fund, immediate family, items with significant and enduring value, this comes out of other stuff, matchable contribution, et cetera. The following contributions are not matchable, there are some changes.
Well, I think you should point out, because people don't have this in front of them, the matchable contribution is a contribution not less than $5 and not more than $250.
All right, and we come back to that with further definition later on.
Why don't you go through the non-matchable contributions?
for the ones of particular note.
Non-matchable contributions, loans, in-kinds, contributions in form of the purchase price made for an item with significant intrinsic and enduring value, transfers, anonymous contributions, contributions whose source is not itemized in the report, contributions from a previous election cycle, illegal contributions, contributions from minors, contributions from vendors for campaigns hired by the campaign, contributions from lobbyists pursuant to subdivision A of the legislative law, and XII, I believe, comes out,
I agree,
right,
yeah.
Jay? I just want to make sure we,
Based upon council's advice.
That's
yeah.
right.
That comes out. That's right.
Okay.
We didn't approve that.
okay. And then for XIII, which I would like it, it wasn't clear to me, so I wanted me, contributions from a contributor who in the aggregate contributes more than $250 to a participating candidate for nomination or election.
From a contributor. What's a
I'm
contributor?
gonna-
One
You got it?
contributor.
Contributions from a contributor who in the aggregate contributes more than $250, and then you pick up with, to a participating candidate.
Now, that, it won't be read to exclude, I'm sorry.
Right,
That won't be read to exclude a contributor who contributes to
Right.
multiple candidates.
Exactly, that's what I
You
was
know, that's what,
concerned
you have to
about.
make that, right.
yeah,
To a participating candidate. You want to one,
to an individual,
I would, if you could do this, I would put a sentence in that candidates may contribute to multiple candidates amounts up to 250, which will be matched.
is this directly from the city law?
Wait.
Yeah,
Contributions,
instead of us.
contributions to a participating candidate, add to a participating, from a contributor who in the aggregate gives more than $250 to such participating candidate.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, good.
Okay?
Yep.
Hey, guys, can I get a job as a bill drafter when this is over?
Maybe not. You're overqualified.
That's what they always say to old people they want to get rid of. All right. Non-participant, and then the other definitions, non-participating candidate, participating candidate, post-election, qualified expenditures, thresholds, which we deal with, transfers, which comes out of the election law. The term surplus means total sum of contributions and matching funds minus your expenditures, and that comes back later in terms of repayment if you have funds left over. If a candidate has funds left over, it gets returned to the Campaign Finance Board.
Just logistically, we're gonna have to work this out, perhaps in regulation, that when you have money that can be rolled over, and you're only allowed to have one campaign account, we'll just have to find some way of segregation to make sure the older funds aren't matched and the newer
Yes.
funds pool. So
Yes,
I know, we'll work that.
there are easy regs on that.
Right.
You know, you can borrow the ones that weren't written.
Thank you.
And then political committee registration. We then provide only one authorized candidate, committee per candidate. They have to register, et cetera. We have the reporting requirements, which are the existing reporting requirements plus an additional report on March 15th of each year. We had thought about May 15th, but with moving the primary to June, that becomes redundant, fortunately. And then 3B, which I think is kind of important, is the PFCB shall review each disclosure report filed and shall have form authorized in political committees of relevant questions it has concerning compliance with the requirements of this title and of the rules and qualification for receiving public matching funds. It's got to be an ongoing process. You can't wait till the end, after they've gone through the election, to just say, no, you were wrong here, you were wrong there, you were wrong here. You got to tell the candidates and the campaigns along the way when there's a potential violation.
Yeah, the only catch there, I mean, not that it's a catch, I agree with you, there needs to be continuing review, is that people don't opt in until the second year, let's say, for the legislature. So watch every single person that's making a filing to make sure all those
Yep.
contributions are matchable. It's gonna be a lot of additional work that,
You'll have a much bigger unit.
yes,
Okay.
that'll be lovely.
And there is an option to file more frequently. They can file once a week as they get closer to the election if they're getting eligibility for matching funds. Okay. Proof of compliance is you've got to maintain, take a look at it, simply, maintain records of your receipts and expenditures. And then we get into eligibility to be in the program. I know this is very exciting, but you got to be a candidate. You have to meet the requirements to be on the ballot. You have to be, in the case of a general or a special election, you have to be opposed by another candidate on the ballot who is not a write-in candidate, unopposed candidates. And then, most importantly, you have to submit a certificate, and there's a date, and there'll be regulations on this, at least 4 months before a primary election or the last day on which a certificate of nomination is filed, saying you're going to participate. And once you participate, you're in. There's no provision for withdrawal of participations, and this follows the city plan. And then the PCFB, Public Campaign Finance Board, has to approve, has to recognize that you filed your certificate and that you've met the requirements. Then, in order to be eligible, you can't make expenditures.
That's a tricky one. F.
Well-
Basically, F says you can't expend any personal funds prior to creating the committee.
That does not exceed 3 times the applicable contribution limit.
That says that they may make a contribution to their committee. I'm talking about like a testing the waters poll or things like that prior to jumping into the race and actually formulating a committee.
We don't have testing the water committees like the feds do. As soon as you start spending money in excess of, what is $1,000,
Right, I'm just saying we have to be.
you've got to file.
I mean, we're just saying we have to be careful if Kim Galvin wants to run for the assembly and I do a poll just to garner support, that's expending personal funds in violation of F because I haven't created my committee yet. So we'll just have to be cognizant
Right, no,
of things
but-
like that.
But if you spend the money you have to create or you have to register personally, or, right?
This just says you have to register first, so we'll pay particular.
Then you've got to meet the thresholds for eligibility we'll come to, and you've got to abide by all requirements even during the post-election period where there are strict limitations. You cannot accept contributions in excess of the contribution limits set forth. There's a safe harbor. If you accept them, it's exceeded, as long as you return it promptly. It doesn't disqualify you.
That comes into play a lot with the $250 take-back that, or change that we made to only the first $250 being matched. There'll be a constant ongoing check against contributors to make sure that the aggregate amount that they've given to the individual doesn't exceed that.
Right.
So that's, as long as they return it quickly, they shouldn't be
Right,
put on for that.
and the reporting requirements should indicate current contribution,
Correct.
total,
Like the FEC does.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the New York City CFB.
City, yeah.
And, you know, their program does that automatically. I
And do
mean,
they use the term immediately versus like within a reasonable time or something, unless that you're gonna spell that out in regulations? Because immediately to me means, like, you learn today, you give it back tomorrow, so you may wanna
I-
create some level of
There's going to be
a
a
reasonable
regulation.
standard on that?
I think the City Campaign Finance Board gives them 10 days or something.
Yeah, that's
like
why
that.
earlier the comment, if somebody gives $251, I almost said then, well, if they give back the buck, you know, they'll be eligible for that, but, that comes into play here, to be a constant watching, monitoring, and return of money in a reasonable time, not.
That's what I was saying, it might be better to use the word reasonable rather than immediate, but.
I agree with that. I think immediate can cause people to be jammed up for no real purpose.
Well,
There's a better
let's
word than
Especially if
that.
they're gonna spell it, potentially will spell out in regulations what reasonable will
agree.
mean.
Yeah.
So we also put in, but not exceeding 30 days, because, you know,
No, we're-
Not, I didn't
No.
say 30 days, but
all for the,
I think
because
within a
the New
reasonable.
York City one is 10 days.
okay, exceeding such limits, I mean, if the candidate,
Returns
where are we? I'm sorry.
little, well, the
Little I.
little I. I think that-
You're looking at exchanging immediately with reasonably,
Immediately.
right?
3 words after PCFB and little I.
Within a reasonable time period
Yeah.
as determined by by rule.
I think if you just change it to candidate reasonably, yeah, within a reasonable time.
You have to say within a
period,
reasonable
it's
time
fine.
frame, yeah.
Within a reasonable.
With a
And
reasonable
then you have to
time
change to little I as well.
As determined by rule?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there should be a rule. You can't
Yeah,
just
there
leave
will
it
be a
up to,
rule.
I guess.
Are we calling rules or regulations? We're trying to be,
We've been saying regulations.
then let's,
I would say by R and R, rules and regulations. Let's be inclusive.
okay. In triple I, do we have the same thing?
You have it in double I.
Double I too.
You have it in double I in the first sentence.
Return such funds immediately.
Okay.
But who's ever draft, I mean, Charlie can make the note, we can.
Conform throughout.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can change that within such reasonable time.
That's fine.
You got that? Okay.
You got it, such reason.
Are you up to the thresholds?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Triple I is the ability to use prior funds, and we added, after discussion last meeting, the PFCB shall adopt regulations to ensure the contributions that would satisfy the applicable contribution limits authorized herein shall be transferred into the appropriate campaign account.
Which is tricky, because we're telling them they can only have one campaign account, and now we know necessarily they have
No, there's only
two
one
for-
authorized campaign account for this campaign. They can retain a different campaign account for different elections outside,
But those are authorized committees as well, just for different things.
for different things.
So that's a term of art we'll have to be cognizant
Okay,
of.
yeah. And what this means is if your last contribution, if you got $10,000 in your
Yeah.
campaign, and your last contribution was a $10,000 contribution, you can only transfer whatever the
Right,
applicable
Correct.
contribution limit is.
18, or
Okay.
whatever it is.
On thresholds, we need to make a change here, because since matchable contributions don't include the first $250 of a larger contribution, but that $250 does apply to meeting the matchable threshold. So I'm proposing, and this will be consistent throughout all of it. I'll start with governor. Governor, not less than $500,000 in matchable contributions, including at least 5,000, instead of matchable contributions, at least 5,000 contributions, including only the first $250 of such contribution shall be counted towards the qualifying threshold.
Well, doesn't it already say that because it says 5,000 matchable contributions?
No, but
Oh,
it's no longer if you're given $251, your contribution is no
matchable.
longer
matchable
matchable.
portions.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
you know, we took out matchable portions of larger contributions.
Do that in all of this stuff.
And do that all the way down
Yeah.
on all 4 sections.
Okay.
Yep.
So up to $250 is what,
Shall include only the first $250, only up to the first $250 of such contributions. It reads. You know, the alternative is to make it simpler and just match the first $250 of every contribution, but we decided against that. Still going through this. And we actually repeat it later on in B, but being redundant, we want to make sure people understand that we really only want to match that first $250. We have the AMI provision, which says that essentially in the below AMI districts, reduced by 1/3. And if you participate in the primary, you have to participate in the general. Okay? Okay, on the F, the limits on public financing, for governor, it's 3.5 million. For lieutenant governor, attorney general, or controller, it's 3.5 million. For senator, it's still 375. For member of the assembly, it's 175. We make the same changes in 2, 3.5 million for the governor, 3.5 for the AG, and 3.5 for the controller. Then we have, if you're not opposed, you don't qualify for matching funds.
Excuse me, just one second, I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood something. In the primary, we have 3.5 million for the governor and 3.5 million for the lieutenant governor.
Right,
And we're saying it's combined,
right.
just 3.5 million though?
They run as a ticket. It's not a separate
In
line.
general.
Right, so
Yep.
it's a total of 10, total of 7,
right.
Right,
right.
right. So 3 is the unopposed candidates. 4 is that as long as the private funds they receive are within the contribution limits, you know, they can raise as much as they want. On the small primary, I was looking at this, I'm not sure I understand why we do it exactly the way we do, so let me ask you. We say that a candidate on the ballot in more than one primary in which the number of eligible voters is less than 1,000, they shall not receive public funds in excess of $5,000. Then we have a provided, however, if there's a non-participating candidate, or, I'm sorry, if there's somebody who's not participating, that's a non-participating candidate, or someone who's spent in excess of $10,000, they can get more money. And you're still only reaching out to the same number of people. You know, you can raise additional money, but the question is, why are we giving them more money when they're only reaching 800 or 900 voters, even if there's somebody else in the race and they're spending more money? They're spending private funds on it. What are the commissioners' thoughts on that? Do we want this exception? I don't think it's necessary, but, you know.
In the whole scheme of things, in the whole scheme of things, this is going to happen very rarely, I would suspect. But unless, you know,
I mean, you know,
I'd take out the ability to
provided
go
that.
back. That's confusing.
I could live with it either way.
So obligated, if we're spent or contracted to become obligated to spend. So just, they haven't raised it, they've just spent it. That doesn't make sense. You see what I mean? So just a,
You want to take out the whole provided that?
yeah, I mean, I'm a regular Joe and I go out and get these people to
Look.
contract to do
Yeah.
these services for me and never raise any money. Why should my opponent get
So,
an increase?
But, I mean, if you contracted, you could have the situation where a mailer or some other communication actually went out, so it doesn't matter if you raise the money or not.
yeah,
You still get
but
5,000.
You're still facing the,
You still get
But look,
5,000.
Yeah, but you're saying-
if you're in a here's my question. If you're in a campaign where there are less than 1,000 people who can vote for you, are there any circumstances under which we should give you more than $5,000 in public funds? You can raise and spend other money, but should we be giving you more than $5,000 if there are less than 1,000 voters that you're trying to reach? I don't think we should.
Right, in some districts,
I don't
there's
think
like
the
8
exception is
reform
necessary.
voters or 12 reform voters.
Not anymore.
Well, soon.
Is it,
But
okay,
right
let me
now-
put it this way. Is there any opposition to taking out the clause that starts at provided, provided however, down through $10,000 for such primary election? Is there any objection? Going once? Going twice? Because this is not something we discussed before, but I think, okay, so that comes out. I mean, if you're in a small primary, the most you can get in public funds is $5,000. Payment of public matching funds, this is really your area, Kim.
Great. Would you like me to go over it?
No, there's a determination of eligibility, there are provisions for calculations.
And we did a lot of this with the pilot program that was jammed
Yeah.
in a couple years ago, the affidavits. We worked with the city campaign finance board and created a lot of the forms and things of that nature,
And then you work with the controller's office.
which was a problem. Well, maybe that was because the pilot program was only for the race of controller.
Right.
But-
Now, the important piece here in 2B is that it does put in the matching, which is $12 for each of the first $50, $9 for each of the next 100, and $8 for each of the following 100.
Right.
All right? Timing of the payments. Let me,
As soon as practicable is a tough phrase,
Yeah.
but it's a realistic one in this particular.
But, it's got some specific requirements
Right,
in here.
correct.
Within 2 days of determining a candidate is eligible, it shall authorize payments, and they have to schedule at least 3 payments in the 30 days prior to a covered election. And the other piece is, and this tries to deal with the non-competitive elections, that they can only get 25% of the maximum public fund payments unless they can demonstrate, and there's a whole procedure for that, that they actually have a credible opposing candidate. And the PFCB shall by rule set forth objective standards to determine whether a candidate is competitive in the procedures for qualifying. And the New York City Campaign Finance Board has done this, and, there are always campaign expenses at the beginning before you even know whether your opponent is credible or not, and you've still got to petition and get on the ballot and whatever. This says we ain't going to give you all the money until we know that it's more than just that.
And were we not going to specify? I thought we previously said we were going to specify some of those same regulations from the city law.
There was a lot of back and forth, and we couldn't reach agreement on some of them, and we figured that, that this is something that the public finance campaign, is a public, it should be
Public
Public
Campaign
Campaign Finance Board.
Board, right.
Wherever it's PFCB, it should be PCFB.
Right.
PCFB,
PCFB.
that they would just,
I mean,
Yeah.
with these time constraints, the state board is just gonna look to the city board and all their criteria.
Oh,
Unless
right.
there's an outlier, it'll probably be almost exactly. I mean, I think the one issue was endorsement or something, just because someone endorses
The
you,
one the city
you
was having
increase your
problems
amount.
with most recently was 12 mentions in a publication or something, because, a lot of the papers will just list everybody who's there, and,
That's not, yeah,
And,
that's not a real mention.
We've gotten 12 mentions in a publication lately.
I'll send you the
I think it's
certification.
obscene.
Yeah. H is an important part because it's qualified campaign expenditures, and we should,
Eight.
right?
What you can't use public
Oh,
funds
H,
for.
yeah.
You cannot, this is for use of public funds, used only by the authorized committee for expenditures to further the participating candidate's nomination or election, et cetera. And then there are a list, this is the important part, such public funds may not be used for expenditures in the violation of law, expenditures in excess of fair market value, expenditures made after the candidate has been disqualified from the, finally disqualified from the ballot, an expenditure made only after the remaining opponent has been disqualified from the ballot, expenditures made in cash, contribution, loan, or transfer made to, or expenditures to support another candidate, political committee, or party committee, or constituted committee. You can't use your money for other candidates or parties. An expenditure to support or oppose a candidate for an office other than in which the participating candidate seeks. So you can say bad things about your opponent. Gifts, except for brochures, buttons, signs, T-shirts, and other printed campaign material, the usual campaign thing. Legal fees to defend against a criminal charge. Any expenditure made to challenge the validity of any petition or designation of nomination or certificate of nomination, et cetera. Payments made to the candidate or a spouse, domestic partner, child, grandchild, parent, grandparent, brother, sister of the candidate or spouse, or domestic partner of such child, blah, 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 blah. Or to a business entity in which the candidate or any such person has a 10% or greater ownership interest.
How are we gonna know that?
They're going to certify it, and if we find out it's wrong, they violated the law.
Okay,
I mean, it's an expenditure made primarily for the purpose of expressly advocating a vote for or against a ballot proposal, unless the expenditure is also made to further the participating candidate's nomination. Payment of any settlement, penalty, or fine imposed pursuant to federal, state, or local law. You can't use the public funds to pay your penalties for the law that you just violated. Payments made through advances, except in the case of individual purchases less than $250, and expenditures to facilitate, support, or otherwise assist in the execution or performance of the duties of public office. They can use their private funds for that, for example, but they cannot use public funds. Composition and powers, we went through it. I just will note about halfway down the first paragraph, January 1, 2022 should be July 1, 2020. We went through this. I don't know who's going to want to take this job if they get $350 a day up to $25,000, but that's not our issue. 2 is the utilization of the compliance unit. 3 requires the establishment of public information, candidate education, and counseling. 4 gives them the authority to adopt rules and regulations. 5 is to create an interactive, searchable computer database that contains all the necessary information.
excuse me, Henry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But
Yep,
can
go
we
back.
go back to paragraph 2?
Absolutely.
The PCFE shall utilize the compliance unit. Isn't it really more than the compliance unit? Isn't it, like, I'm the head of the compliance unit, but I'm also in the council's unit? So isn't it really the compliance staff or the SBOE staff? You may use the public information office to set up debates.
You mean it has to be broad?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Should be
broader.
broader.
Yeah, it should be
Okay.
broader.
So
I mean, I think we understand what we're trying to say.
how about if we just make it shall utilize the staff of the State Board of Elections and hire?
That-
I mean, is that too
Don't-
broad? I don't think so.
Don't we have a section in the book that says the hiring and the firing
No, we have,
of the election law by the state board?
No,
well,
they took
we
that
can
there's
make
a
out.
it
president of the State Board, and they'll hire all of the existing staff, but there will be additional staff
Appointed
hired
additional?
just for the public campaign finance. So,
Well, this is the way I see it. Let me just see if we're on the same page. I see a compliance unit that we have now that deals with the 17,000 plus filers. Now I see this new program coming in. I see some people in compliance staying with the regular files, some being moved into the public financing arena. I also see people like me, an attorney, dealing with both sets of people for drafting of advisory opinions and things like that, or additional staff that has to come in. And then when we get the three commissioners, they work with the other four to supplement whatever staff is needed and to work as a unit within the Board of Elections itself.
How about saying something like this, shall utilize the compliance unit and such other staff of the State Board of Elections as needed, as needed?
People that are listening right now are freaking out because they think that we're just giving away their staff. That's why I'm trying to explain. in
What
the
should it say?
totality.
Do you have a suggestion on what it should say? For it to work, the purpose
I
is.
think the PCFB and the State Board of Elections shall hire such other staff necessary to carry out its duties.
But aren't we using existing staff too? Isn't the intent to use existing staff like the compliance unit and others?
Such additional other staff as are necessary to carry out its duties. I mean, right now, you can't, you're gonna need more people.
right.
Yeah, so you're going to leave the higher part in
And that's
there.
why we have.
The question is
and
how
hire
you,
such other staff as are necessary.
Right,
So we want to be able to use the existing
why can't
staff.
it just be the PCFB
The staff for the
shall hire
PCFB.
such other staff as necessary to carry out its duties?
Because we
no,
want to
because
say
The
that
reliance on the board.
we are relying on the State Board of Elections because you guys are still going to get all the filings, right?
Right.
We didn't want to have a separate unit
No, I
doing separate
agree.
filings and
I
whatever.
agree. Yeah.
how about such, utilize the compliance unit and such
I just
other
don't like-
staff
I just don't
as
like-
may be needed?
I just don't like the word utilize. The PCFB shall.
Because it makes sense, that's why I was
work
trying to say if we
with
can make it
or-
pursuant, because we don't need two units. If we already have the Board of Election, like 2 IT units, 2 compliance units, 2 databases, because we're gonna be using the one from the
Right,
Board
we're
of
all
Elections.
agreeing, I just don't know what the right word is. Okay,
Or we can be a little broader and say, the PSC shall utilize the resources of the State Board of Elections and hire such additional staff as are necessary.
yeah,
And-
it's actually yeah.
Because it's more than staff, we're going to utilize your other resources also, your data bit, right?
Yeah.
So-
I mean, I think it's almost the reverse, except for PCFB means the board, and I'm getting confused about the staff. You
Right.
see what I'm saying?
Right.
The PCFB is the 7 commissioners,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
But-
maybe it should be
and the
the,
staff falls
the s-
underneath it. So the PCFB shall utilize,
so
Shall
what it
have
would
a-
be the
how about
staff
the
for the
The PCFB shall have
PCFB.
available the resources of the State Board of Elections and shall hire such additional staff. Shall have
yeah,
available?
how about we just have the idea and we work on the exact language?
No,
Yeah.
Well,
under the open meetings law, I think we have to reach a conclusion on this before we leave today, unless you want to get together on Saturday.
I like you all.
We'll love you, turkey.
Who's providing
You
the,
know-
who's
The
providing the
leftovers.
leftovers?
I'll
yes.
have some.
How about the State Board of Elections staff and the PCFB? The State Board of Elections and the PCFB shall utilize the same staff and hire any other staff that are necessary to carry out the duties.
Say it again. The PCFB and the State Board of Elections.
And the SBOE
You want to say shall utilize existing
shall
staff?
utilize existing SBOE staff and hire any additional staff that may be necessary to carry out its duties.
Say it one more time. Shall utilize.
Existing SBOE staff and hire any additional staff to carry out its duties.
Okay? So it reads, the PCFB and the State Board of Elections shall utilize existing State Board of Elections staff and hire such other staff as are necessary to carry its, no,
And hire any additional staff.
wait, who hires, the PCFB or the PCFB and the state board together?
In my opinion, it has to be combined.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that. Look, the 4 commissioners are on the PCFB, I mean, it's gonna be,
Right.
right. So the PCFB and the State Board of Elections shall utilize existing State Board of Elections staff and shall hire such other staff as are necessary to carry
I mean, that-
out its duties.
That way, if we know
Got
there's an
it.
immediate need for an IT contractor to work on the software, we can do that while everybody decides who the
Could we-
next 3 that are appointed
Instead
are gonna
of
be.
shall, could it be may? Just because there may be times where it's appropriate to have 2 of one, and I think we should defer to the PCFB and the board to work it out.
So
So
the-
may utilize existing.
Yes,
staff,
okay.
And shall hire
Okay,
as
may.
addition. Do you know what I mean? 'Cause
Yes.
it's not everybody. We're
No,
not
I
trying to
agree.
say,
I
you're
agree.
making the whole point, we need the right funding.
I agree.
Thank you.
So while,
So we now have
Yeah, that's better, thank
the
you.
PCFB and the State Board of Elections may utilize the existing State Board of Elections staff and hire such other staff as are necessary to carry out its duties.
I thought Commissioner Galvin was going to bring up the point around the budget, so I just wanted to clarify, because when we last talked, I thought we were adopting a city approach of the PCFB will submit its budget.
I don't think we're there yet.
Well, that's in the same paragraph, so when you came back to paragraph 2, I thought that's what you were coming back for. So the
Yeah.
last sentence, I didn't, and if we are considering a different approach, I just want
I
to
thought they
understand the
said-
rationale.
Someone said it was
Right.
outside of our purview.
We had a discussion at some point at the last meeting. I was there, Jim was there, I don't know who else, and he said you can't do that under the executive law, the way the budget is established. You can't, you know,
Got it,
you
okay,
can't take it away from the governor. The governor
see
has
the
to
book
submit
with
the
it.
budget
Yeah.
essentially.
got it, and that's helpful, I just wanted to make
But
sure.
it does say, shall explain the difference.
Yep,
Thank you.
if they're gonna take it away, they gotta tell us why.
Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
You know, and the interesting thing, and, well, the interesting thing is, with a city program, while the council has the authority to change the campaign finance board's request, they never have. So, I
No.
mean, it's, you know, it's.
The point that I was making, only because we did this very frequently at the Board of Elections, is that in the city, you know, we use the, this section for the election of personnel, 3-300. Yeah, the board employees, every Board of Elections shall be appointed, so they can use this in order to
Wow.
hire the staff.
We're overriding that a little bit by giving other people, the PCFB also the authority.
Thank you.
To participate in the hiring of staff.
But if you,
We had originally looked at
I put that in originally, but if you look at the composition, you have the 4 current, then you have the one added by Speaker Hasty and Majority Leader Cousins, and then you have
The one by the 2
Minority Leader
minorities.
Holden Flanagan, and then you have the governor, so it should function in accordance with that particular provision.
Okay.
We-
Okay, Kim.
Okay, rules and regs, database, advice, the board will give advice, and they're bound by the advice they give. They're subject to the Article 6 and 7 of the Public Officers Law, which means they've got all the limitations on them. 8, the PCFP shall have sole authority to investigate all referrals and complaints relating to the administration of the program, and shall have sole authority to administer the program established herein and to enforce such provisions except as otherwise provided herein. And that deals with the additions that were made a couple years ago about creating enforcement council. We're saying this is not part of the enforcement council's job, it's solely the PCFB's job here. And they can take actions necessary to do it.
Yep.
Audits and repayments. Audits no later than a year and a half after the election unless there's fraud, knowing and willful violation of Article 14 or criminal activity. It's going to put a burden on the board, but they got to get them done.
They do. And
You
it's
can't
a-
be running a campaign when
and
you
it's
have an
a-
audit hanging
And
over
it's
your
a
head.
weighted random
Right,
selection.
and we get that. Every participating candidate who receives public funds and every,
For statewide office.
for statewide office, and any other office of $500,000 or more shall be audited, and it shall be a third of of all the other campaigns. And there's a bit of a process here, and then leads to regulations, the actual, there's going to be a lottery weighted so that if you've been audited before, you have less of a chance if you haven't been audited before, and that's subject to regulations. And they have to issue a campaign, to each campaign, a final audit report that details its findings. We're moving along, we're almost done. Repayments. If the PCFB determines that any portion of any public funds payment was in excess of the amount required, the committee shall pay back to the PFCC the equal amount, first using the surplus funds for repayments and such other funds as it may have, provided, however, if the erroneous payment was the result of an error by the board, then the erroneous payment will be deducted from any future payments, and no future payments will be made until the excess has been repaid. And importantly, the candidates authorized committee are jointly and severally liable for any repayments. If any portion of the payment was used for other than a qualified campaign expenditure not approved by the PCFB, the PCFB shall notify the committee of the amount, and the candidate, the treasurer, and the candidates authorized committee are jointly and severally liable. So treasurers have a real job to make sure the money's being spent properly. And then there's the surplus payment repayment, which we discussed earlier. If you got money left over, you gotta repay the public funds that you've received. Rules and regs. The PCFB shall promulgate regulations for certification of the amounts of funds payable by the controller. And this is working with the controller's office, Kim Wright, to make sure that, we can make sure people get paid on a timely manner. Rules and regulations adopted by the board are subject to the State Administrative Procedures Act. I don't think we need to say that, but we're saying it anyway because it should. We have a section on civil penalties, which are within the realm of the PCFB to impose. So what the staff does is merely a recommendation of a violation. We've asked this, as part of the rules and regs, they will come up with a schedule of fines, and then the PCFB will deal with it. So they'll determine whether a violation has occurred, give written notice and an opportunity to contest. If appropriate, assess the penalties. Following such notice and opportunity to be heard, if there's criminal conduct, it's a crime, and the Attorney General shall have exclusive authority to prosecute. And that
I
was,
think we need to add in there, the Attorney General, upon
Upon re-
receiving a referral, shall have exclusive authority.
okay, you are correct, thank you.
A referral from the PCS, whatever those words are. PCFB.
Court proceedings, again, there's a time limit, 14 days, and then that these have priority over other matters. The PCFB may institute a special proceeding to obtain a judgment for civil penalties. And that's their job, it's not the Enforcement Council's job, that's why we put it in here. The next is the report. We discussed it already. We're changing it to starting January 1st, 2025, and every second year thereafter. And that includes recommendations for changes. We discussed the dates. They'll promulgate rules rules for debates. There's severability, which says essentially, okay, no, if any clause of section 2B sub D. So if the AMI provision is declared invalid, the severability clause provides that the number of, the threshold requirement is the same in terms of number of contributions, but the amount is reduced to, or is changed to $10,000 for state senate and $5,000 for state assembly. Okay, part 3.
Wait a second, should there be a further separate, excuse me, somebody? If there's should there be a provision, further severability provision, any other provision?
That's later.
That's later.
Okay,
That's later.
We got that, all
Yeah,
right.
this is just the part 2 severability.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's at the end.
All right, so we're up to part 3.
Okay, part 3, can you discuss this, Kim? Because this, Kim, can you discuss part 3? This is in your wheelhouse or something. This is the state controller and the commissioner of taxation and finance. It's short.
I can't find it.
Part 3, page 17, at the bottom.
Oh, part 3. This is the whole funding mechanism. And
Right.
we're gonna establish a fund, and this indicates either by, the abandoned property fund, tax checkoffs, or the general fund. And I don't know how you're gonna accept contributions to it from organizations and outside individuals, but perhaps they can figure that out.
Yep.
The problem, everything is pretty standard here, except, how quickly it has to come out and how it has to be authorized. It's just setting it up is going to be the crux, the cutting of the bond between the board and the payment entity is gonna be the difficult part to work through.
Well, if the city could work it through between the controller of the Department of Finance and the Campaign Finance Board, I have full faith that the New York State Board of Elections, the Public Campaign Finance Board, and the controller's office can work this out.
No, I think they can, especially, like I said before, the pilot program was a bad example because we only had 8 months, it was jammed in, it was that
Right.
race. So given they're obviously smart professional people that would work to do this, and so hopefully, it's put up sooner than later, so basically we get sign off here, get vouchered, they'd issue the money within a certain amount of time, and the candidate should be set. That's
Okay.
always tricky, the money.
Yep. All right, and then it says, part 4 is the party definition, and just so I'm clear, at least 2% or 130,000 votes, whichever is greater of the total votes cast for governor, and the same as elected cast for president. Is that correct? And the requirements for signatures for an independent nominating petition shall be set at,
Or 1%.
and at least 500 signatures? I'm sorry, what's the second? 500 signatures
Or 1% of the
or
voters,
1%?
whichever is less.
Okay, okay. And then part 5,
Sorry, could you say that in the mic? You were kind of off mic there.
I'm sorry. All right, yeah, so the signature requirements under subdivision 1 of section 6142 of the election law shall be set at 45,000 signatures or 1% of the total number of votes excluding blanks and void ballots cast for the office of governor at the last gubernatorial election, whichever is less, with at least 500 signatures or 1% of the enrolled voters, whichever is less, from each of 1/2 of the congressional districts in the state. Thank you. And then the commission's recommendations set forth herein shall become effective on,
Can I make a suggestion? It says 15th of November, 2022. I think Election Day is the 9th. How about the day after the election? Why wait for a week? I mean,
Let's
it's
see.
minimal, but it should start, the cycle starts the next day. No?
wait, I think we got this backwards, by the way. No, because. all right.
You mean
Well,
November
hold on.
9th?
Or November,
No,
The
part
election's the
one,
That's the
doesn't
first
part one becomes effective immediately. The rest of it becomes effective.
No, hold on.
Go away.
No,
All right.
no.
right, no.
Part one is, no, part one of the contribution limits, they don't become effective.
All right.
Right?
Okay, except that part one of these recommendations shall be offered the 15th. So what's the date?
You said instead of the 15th, the 9th?
I'm saying like.
Or the 10th, the day after
10th,
the election.
The day after the election is the 10th, I think.
The day after, in 2022?
Yeah.
Is the election's the 8th?
Is the 8th, is that
Yeah.
right?
So then it'll
So
be the 9th.
9th, yeah.
The 9th.
But it changes every year, so we should.
No, I'm
No,
looking at
she just
2022
checked.
calendar.
refers to 2022. That's right.
So
Okay?
it'll be November 9th.
Earlier in that provision,
But it's, so when does this become?
the effective date of the recommendations, January 2020.
Except part one. And the campaign.
Yeah, I know, but I thought the enabling legislation says that unless the legislature comes back by December 22nd, the recommendations are law. How are you then making these effective a week later?
Well, I don't think that doesn't contradict, because,
The enabling legislation says our recommendations are effective that date. And then you're saying everything's effective, but then they're not really effective until January 1st?
well, yeah, it just, I mean, it's going to be the 21st of December, but we're starting fresh in January 1st.
Okay.
They could begin,
Okay.
we're talking about,
I see.
nobody's doing anything during Christmas anyway.
Okay, so it's intention, I see what
Yeah,
you're doing.
that's it, just
Why
to
would you
start
change the
fresh.
rule with a week left to cause
Right,
that
yeah,
confusion?
That's right. That's all.
So they're effective but not implemented until?
Right, it's not implemented.
Okay, I got you.
That's right.
And then, John Nona, 5B is.
That's the severability, I got it.
That's the general
Yeah.
severability clause
Okay.
for the rest of the statute.
Good.
Well,
So when are
We
we
have
going
to-
to, when are we going to expect to get the final?
We will
list
get that
before
out to you in a matter of short days. If I could, just before you go,
I'm not going anywhere, we have to vote.
yeah, that's what I want to do.
vote.
Right, that's what I want to do. I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations of the commission. Is there a second?
second,
This motion's been seconded. I think we've had discussion. Any other discussion? Okay, I'm going to do a roll call vote, same as I have in the past.
Can we just explain our vote for a little, just a little bit, not a lot?
Yes.
you want to do it before you vote or when you vote? Up to you.
When you vote?
Okay. Commissioner Berger?
Well, we're going to explain our.
You don't have to.
Just very briefly, look, this has been a long process. It's not been an easy process. I don't think any of us could walk away saying, I got everything I wanted when I walked into this process. Somebody once told me, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. I think we've got a system that's workable. I think we've got a system that will be effective, but I think it will change over time, just like the New York City system changed from when it first started, and it changed significantly over time. But I think this will be an effective way to fulfill the mandate of the statute. And, I really think that the compromises we've had to make are not unreasonable, and out of that, we get a system that is a public campaign finance system, and I vote aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Dennerstein? Yes. There's no wire.
I vote aye as well, and I would like to thank my fellow commissioners for their service and for their time and commitment. I know that this has taken a lot of time from people's very busy schedules, and I appreciate how thoughtful everybody has been and how respectful of one another, regardless of what we're discussing. And I think that it is important that New York bring its laws, be a leader, and starting with public financing. And I hope that our elected officials will improve upon what we're doing here today.
Thank you. So, then I have Commissioner Galvin.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank all the commissioners, all the advocates, and all the people that have given testimony. I started out this process with a very different view of public financing than I have now. Extraordinarily different, actually. And I know that if the advocates out here put pen to paper, this is not an ideal program, but New York State and the campaigns run herein are not an ideal situation. So what we did is, I believe we created a system that is workable. Certainly there are some things that are wrong with it that we've all discussed, but there are also some good that I see, good things that I see. We lowered a lot of limits. We amplified the in-district match. Candidates will be incentivized to raise the smaller money from the people that they represent. This should potentially create a grassroots excitement that will carry through to the election and the candidates themselves. But with regard to the process, I've been listening, I've been understanding, I've been talking through rationales, and like I said, it did change my perspective. And last night I got an email while I was trying to figure out how I'm going to vote on this. I was pondering my thoughts, and someone said, you know, you're looking at it from the perspective of the candidate, and the candidate getting the money, as opposed to the perspective of the voter that will now feel empowered and will now be part of a system to give a $10 contribution that will be matched, that will actually matter. And you know, that really rang true with me. And I all things aside, it's the funding mechanism that gives me pause, that won't allow me to vote for this bill. I believe it's a system that will work. I believe that we did our best. If the legislature could see its way to fund the program out of only private donations or anything other than the general fund, marijuana sales, let's say, or gambling, online gambling, something that didn't come from the people, because when you look at the people's money, I think there are more critical things on balance, like homelessness and opioid addiction and mental health programs and things like that, that would require the direct infusion in a quicker manner. But I have changed my position. I am supportive of the program motivation and the people behind it. And if they are able to change the funding mechanism, I would be voting yes, but unfortunately right now it's a no.
Thank you. Commissioner Katachu?
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank my fellow commissioners. I've definitely enjoyed this illustrative process and learned from all of you about what it takes to build consensus as we tell our young people at Generation Citizen. You know, there are some things that you've heard, all of you have heard me be on the record of hoping that we could get to a better place of consensus, including lower contribution limits, setting different contribution limits for participating and non-participating candidates, thinking about an out-of-district match, especially in light of the progressive match, including war chest, the commencement of the program starting in the 2022 election cycle. But all in all, I think this system is a good step in the right direction to amplify the voice of everyday New Yorkers, to bring democracy to the grassroots and make sure that it's accessible and that everyone understands how they can participate in the process and make sure that their voices are heard to get elected officials elected who represent their views. So I'm proud to vote aye in support of this and want to thank Professor Malvin, the Brennan Center, and other advocates for, and the staff for assisting us in getting to this place we are today.
Thank you. I'll make my statement as well. First of all, I want to thank Westchester Community College for hosting us here, and John Nona for helping arrange that. And I think that they've been more than hospitable, and I appreciate all of the staff and the folks who work here. I want to also thank Professor Michael Malvin, who did a tremendous job giving us quite a lot of information, did a tremendous amount of work. Campaign Finance Institute for all the work that you did and your advocacy. You know, again, I don't always agree with every element of it, but I understand the view in your heart, and I think you're certainly working from the right place. Same thing applies certainly to the Brennan Center, which has worked fabulously on all of this, been great advocates, and I know that not every aspect of this program will meet your expectations, but I'm hoping in the overall, you will take a look at it and certainly look back at it and see this as a tremendous starting point. Charles Pensabene, who's been with us writing reports and the rest and keeping track of everything, has been fabulous, as has been Jeremy Creelan and Seth Agata, who've helped work on drafts, Jim McGuire, our attorney, and Karen Coleman and the whole staff from the Department of Labor and all the folks from the state that have helped us. Thank you so much. This couldn't have happened without you. You're fabulous. I'll go anywhere with you folks anytime. So that being said, I just, last thing I would like to say, though they're not here, is to all of the people who came to the hearings and were appeared so angry at me in particular at times, and angry at the others. I want you to know, and the only thing I would say on the record is this: if I thought that the views that gave you that anger and that view were true, I wouldn't have taken the position I take. I am trying to do the best that I can as one member to build a system that will be fair, balanced, sustainable, and effective. And I respect all of the views, even those that were hotly delivered. I certainly understand this is democracy. You have the right to say them. I respect you for saying them and for coming here and spending the time to do so. And I certainly would hope that you take away from this that I at no point ever meant any disrespect to anyone. I respect you tremendously, even though we may disagree. And on that note, I vote yes. Commissioner Nona.
Well, I want to begin by thanking everyone who came to public hearings to express their views, and many of them had very strong views, and that's fine. Especially want to thank those public advocates, the Brennan Center, Reinvent Albany, Fair Elections New York, Professor Malbin, Professor Berfault, and others who really helped us understand what needs to be done to establish a effective public campaign financing program. I know we weren't able to do everything you think we should do to establish a better program, but we did what we had to do in order to reach a consensus on this commission. And I think every member of this commission worked very hard to try to reach that consensus, and I want to thank them for their participation. I'm very thankful for the Department of Labor. We were not given a lot of resources to do our work, but we were able to put together what we needed, and we were given the personnel of the Department of Labor to help us organize these meetings. I also want to thank this college on whose Board of Trustees I'm privileged to serve for providing this space. You know, this commission was created because the legislator was unable to enact the public campaign finance program. And I don't think the legislature will do it. I think it was really left to this commission, and we worked hard to try to achieve that. Questions have been raised as to whether we had the authority to do this, whether you could delegate to a commission recommendations for a law. But that's for the courts to decide. What our job was to carry out the task that was delegated to us, and I think we worked pretty hard to establish a system and to develop and to complete our task. We reached consensus on a number of difficult issues. It was not easy, but the important thing is to try to reach consensus, and that required compromise. I was not happy with some of the votes I had to take in order to make sure we get a system in place. That was our primary objective. I would have preferred not to have to deal with party qualifications. I would have preferred not to have to deal with the number of signatures you need on an independent nominating petition. But it seemed very clear to me that this program that we developed would not be able to go forward unless we reached some accommodation on those issues. And in the end, my feeling was we could not let this opportunity to establish a workable public campaign finance program slip away from us because of these other issues. We had to try to reach a consensus on these other issues. I think we reached a consensus that was fair in many respects, even though I have some reservations about them. And the likelihood of the legislature being able to do this, to my opinion, was rather low. So I think we've accomplished our task, and I will vote in favor of this recommendation.
Thank you. Commissioner Previtt?
Yeah, just to reiterate everyone's appreciation for those that provided a great deal of information throughout the process, and for the commissioners taking a great deal of time out of their schedules to to participate. I certainly felt as if everyone up here gave it their full effort. With respect to the program, there are a few components that I very much agree with, such as the in-district limitation and the utilization of the Board of Elections. I thought either of those going the other way would have made no sense with respect to the goals we were charged with accomplishing. And I think both of those move us in that direction. Otherwise, many aspects of the program, I feel, move us away from those goals and even undermine them. I think there was a movement on another issue that I thought very much improves upon the program and the charge with the limitation on the match of only the $250 total. The main charge was empowering the small dollar donor, and the way the system is set up in many aspects, a lot of that money still stays in, and the endless fundraising is still the incentive to fundraise endlessly is still there. And until those aspects of the program are removed, I don't think you're really developing a taxpayer-funded, public-financed program. You're really creating, a base subsidy for candidates. So, in total, although there's some aspects, I think the commission did fulfill its charge. I think on the whole, we left many aspects in need of further addressing, and I'm hopeful that the program will be reformed similar to the New York City program, that this isn't the end of it. And as we get evidence from actual participation, the legislature will move to further refine it in a way similar to the city. So I vote no.
No, okay. Thank you. Commissioner Rodriguez.
The problem with having a last name that begins with R is that many people have spoken before me that have said what I was going to say, so I just want to join in thanking everyone who has helped in this process. I want to especially say thank you to the fellow commissioners. None of this was easy. I think in retrospect, if we look back when we were asked to serve, some of us may consider or reconsider taking that phone call. It's not perfect, and democracy is not perfect, but we all were able to participate. And so we have not created something that is perfect, but we've created something that is a strong foundation that I think can be built upon. There are parts that we are proud of individually, and there are parts that we wish we didn't even have to address. As it is, I think that the foundation is a solid foundation. I'm happy to have been a part of it, and I will vote yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Vargas.
Okay. Going last, right? No pressure.
No pressure.
So first, yes, I would like to thank everyone for all of us serving together. As difficult as it is and was, I think that we are very reasonable individuals, and it wasn't as complicated as I first thought, that it will be more vocal as between each other regarding the agreements. But I think we did a very great job, and it was my pleasure to work with everyone in this commission board, so thank you very much. And especially all the staff. I know they already gave a shout out to Karen, but I know she was going crazy every single meeting, making sure we have our space, our IT, and everything working properly. Thank you very much. And everyone else who's been working every single time we have a meeting, all the staff who made it possible. I know that when we started, it was very difficult. Nothing was allocated to us regarding resources or funding. So everyone that made it possible, thank you very much. And all the public advocate groups that came by and every hearing to bring us data, information, and making sure that we have the proper knowledge to make an informed decision. Thank you very much. And I think, not to say unlike Commissioner Previtt, but I think that this report is definitely a good starting ground for us to go for. And I do think that it does amplify the voice of the low-income districts, because it makes sure that their $10 goes such a long way. And $250 may not seem a lot to a lot of people, but that's a lot of money for one individual who's the actual breadwinner of that entire household to even donate. So in that regard, if their $10 and $20 go this much farther, it means a lot to me. And even my community is it's low income in comparison to others like in Long Island. So I think in that respect, I think we're doing a very good job. And it does encourage voters. Voters have to come out and vote and make sure that they're continuing to be heard, you know. If everybody disagrees or does not in any way think anything that we voted on makes sense, it would encourage them to come out and vote and make sure that their party or the individual that they want to support is still there because they're coming out and making their voice heard as well. And I would like to finish off by saying that my vote is conditioned upon that I can receive the report and all the minor changes that we made to the language before it gets released.
Oh, sure. That's again, we're going to do that.
Thank you. So I vote yes.
Very good. So the final vote is 7 in favor, 2 opposed. The motion passes. The recommendation will be forwarded. We will get the information to everybody. I also want to say to my fellow commissioners, it has been a pleasure meeting you and working with you. And I think I'm going to enjoy it, and I hope we stay together a little bit. Do I have Commissioner? Yeah, right.
No, that we post on the website, on the campaign finance report.newyork.gov website, the legislation
will.
that's sent around before it's issued on December 1st.
I thought you were gonna suggest a dinner that Jay was.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
Yes,
Exactly.
and
We're
that
gonna
it
do
was
that
on
too.
you. Isn't the
All right,
dinner?
can I ask for a motion?
Jay.
Yep.
Dinner's on
The-
you.
and
Dinner's on me.
The process of legislation.
Is
that-
anybody going to match?
The process of legislation that we went through is like making sausages.
Yeah.
So we have to have sausages for dinner.
Okay, we will do that. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Move to adjourn.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all for your service.